Detours. Brought to you by Sports and Spokes, the magazine for wheelchair sports and recreation. This year's Boston Marathon is set to celebrate a very special milestone in wheelchair racing history. 50 years ago, Bob Hall was granted permission to push the 26.2 miles that opened the door for so many to follow through. In 75, Hall towed the line in an adapted daily chair and rolled a 2-hour, 58-minute marathon. Fast forward to last year's race, and Switzerland's Marcel Hug ripped off a simply unimaginable 1 hour, 15 minutes. Joining me today is Amanda McGrory, who will be providing expert analysis for the pro wheelchair division. Welcome, Amanda.
Thanks, Bob.
Hey, what a race. I mean, this is, for all intents and purposes, this is our Super Bowl. The Boston Marathon has always had a very special place in wheelchair racing history.
I think even beyond wheelchair racing, just in the running world, the Boston Marathon is the marathon. If you meet anyone anywhere and say, "Oh, I'm a marathoner, I've done marathons," the first question anyone asks you, runner, wheelchair racer, no matter what, is, "Have you done Boston?" It's the race. It is the most iconic marathon in the world.
Undoubtedly, after so many years of racing, it was the only one that really got my juices flowing. I mean, you just sit at the top of that line. You're about to go 40 miles an hour, toe to toe, inches apart from other racers. It's very special. So 50 years ago, Bob Hall does this, and he really does open a door because it's not only a historic marathon in terms of what it is that we accomplish from a chair standpoint, it's also one of the richest races that we have on the circuit also.
It is. So the Boston Marathon field is notoriously deep. They bring in a massive field from across the world, all of the best wheelchair racers. But in addition to that, they bring in a pro para-athlete division. So not wheelchair racers, but other Paralympic eligible classifications. So visually impaired runners, amputees, and there's paid prize money for every single one of these divisions.
Yeah, it's really incredible. They do put an awful lot of effort into making the division, just something truly special. And I think back on some of those, memories of performances. Jean Driscoll, just a legend. She wins the race 8 times. Ernst van Dijk, South African, picks up 10 wins there. Franz Nietlischbach of Switzerland and countryman Heinz Frey. Heinz Frey picks up the 100th. Franz wins it 5 times. Just so many great, outstanding, memorable moments.
So many major events within wheelchair racing history. And also just like, that is huge. You win Boston, that can set up years of your career because it's a hard race. It has a notoriously difficult course, as well as a notoriously deep field. So if you win Boston, you are really proving to yourself and to the rest of the wheelchair racing world that you are the best.
And you set that up really nicely with the course. So many people think, oh boy, Boston is such a fast course. And it can be, depending upon that tailwind, the course running west to east, if there's a tailwind, if the weather conditions are proper. But so many other things go into what it takes to accomplish this race and do it, from the aspect of completion. I mean, from start to finish, it's just a heads down kind of race. You've got to be able to know what you're doing.
I always tell everybody that the Boston Marathon is either the fastest and easiest or the slowest and hardest race on the circuit. And it really, really depends on the wind. It's a straight line course. I think there's a total of 3 turns in the race, and they all happen after 20 miles. Most of them are coming into the finish. So if you start off the race with a headwind, with rain, with those awful conditions, you're not getting a break. You're getting that for 26 miles straight in through the finish. But on the flip side, it's a nice sunny day, you get a little bit of a tailwind, it can be really fast. So as an athlete, some of my slowest times ever, as well as my career personal best, have come from the Boston course.
And the course, in so many ways, Amanda, it's broken down into almost what I would like to consider to be chapters. It starts out in Hopkinton, so you're basically in a very, very rural area where there's very little shoulder to the road. It's very hazardous as you start out, and of course, bang, right off the bat, you're going 40 miles an hour. You pass through Hopkinton, you get into Ashland. Now, for the first time, almost 2 miles into the race, this is where you start stroking.
Yes. So the first like 2 miles of the race, almost the first 5K really, is downhill. So right off the start, it is jockeying for position, getting yourself where you want to be in the front, behind a really good coaster, tucking in for that big coast down the hill. And then there's not much you can do. Most wheelchair racers can push up to 25 or so miles an hour. Some of the men with really good hand speed, Marcel Hug, Daniel Romachuk, can push up closer to 30 miles an hour. But once you're hitting 40, if you try to push, you're just slowing yourself down. So you're tucked in and hoping that you can hang on till you hit that point, and then it opens up.
And the weird thing about 40 miles an hour from the gun is that it feels so much faster than 40 miles an hour because you haven't been moving. You're basically 0 to bang, and you're suddenly going 30, 35, 40 tucked, and it feels so fast, and you're inches away from other racers.
It's so strange. That's super true. And I've never actually thought about that before. But if you're pushing on a flat and you're at 15 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour, and you kind of slowly increase into that downhill, it's not as startling. But when you come off the start from a dead stop and you're just seeing like people whipping by you, trees whipping by on the side of the road, it's pretty scary. And unless you have really good chair control, it's also super, super tempting to ride your brake there, which you do not want to do off the start.
No, and then the other factor also is the roads, which is something they do their very best. I mean, I've seen them out there working on those roads continuously, patching holes, but you can never tell from year to year if they have those years where there's a lot of frost, if they have those years where they've had to do a lot of plowing. The roads can be either particularly good or they can be particularly not good. They're usually not great. You don't find pancake flat perfect roads up in the Northeast right after winter.
That's absolutely true. I do think that one of the things Boston has going for it versus New York City Marathon or Chicago Marathon, where you're actually on the city streets that are getting a lot of traffic, is that some of those country roads, the first 15 miles of the race when you're in the suburbs of Boston, they're not great, but they're pretty smooth. There's no major potholes. There's no giant manhole covers. Well, there's some, and you've got to keep your head up, and you've got to keep a lookout for them, as tempting as it is to tuck all the way down and be as arrow as you can. Going at 40 miles an hour, those things and those hazards come up really, really quickly. And so if you don't have your head up and you're not looking, that's a recipe for a crash.
Yeah, and you're talking about obstacles and pitfalls. Even though there's only 3 turns on the course, every one of them is dangerous.
Yep, they're tight turns. A lot of them, because the course is a net downhill, a lot of those turns come after a downhill. So you're coming into them really quickly, not ready for them. And then towards the second half of the race, there's also two different places where you cross train tracks. And train tracks are terrible in racing chairs because our tires are so narrow, they will get caught in between the rails. And so the train tracks come in at an angle, the road is going straight. And if you don't see them coming and you hit them at an angle, it's a very good way to get your wheels caught up in them and crash. Gene Driscoll notoriously
Absolutely.
crashed there in the 90s. And a few years ago, Marcel Hug was out by himself and they came up on him faster than he expected. And the same thing, you hit the tracks the wrong way. No matter how experienced you are, you can't save it and you're going down.
I certainly remember those tracks. You had to make sure that you came in and took the pitch and tried to hit them square as square on as you possibly could, because you couldn't always hit it as square as you really wanted to.
The other thing I think that's really deceiving about the Boston Marathon course is even in those headwinds years, the first half of the course is pretty much downhill.
Mhm.
There's a couple of chunks where, like at 2 miles, where you get a little bit of a stretch where you're pushing and you can set up your positioning a little bit. But for the majority of that race, you are going downhill. And then you hit the second half and you start climbing. And I think it's deceiving because a lot of times you will cross that half marathon mark with a crazy, crazy fast time, like under 40 minutes.
Sure.
But it's almost impossible to run a negative split on Boston because of how hard the hills are on the second half.
We'd like to take a minute to thank our sponsor, Sports and Spokes Magazine. For nearly 50 years, they've produced stories on iconic athletes performing at the top of their game, given generational coverage of sports dating back to the 1970s, and they've shown the way with exciting and timeless magazine cover shots. To stay on top of all the latest news from the world of high performance adaptive sports, go to sportsandspokes.com. Sports and Spokes, the magazine for wheelchair sports and recreation. So the course basically has an overall elevational loss of 459 feet. And like you said, it is very deceptive because so much of that occurs in the very first half of the race. Then you make the famous turn at 17.3 miles in Newton. You take the turn at the firehouse. It's literally called the turn at the firehouse.
Yep.
And we have seen people go off course there. We've seen people take that a little bit too loose, get tangled up in the fence, and we've seen that. We saw that happen to Marcel Hoog, and then you have to go through the climbs. Now, people talk about Heartbreak Hill in terms of it being a 3-hill climb. I say it's really kind of more of a 4-hill climb, and what's interesting about it is you go up and you plateau, you go up, you plateau. There's a certain way to run Heartbreak to maximize what you can get out of it.
I mean, it's really difficult and it's really challenging, especially for someone who has never run the Boston Marathon course before. Because, like you said, you're climbing and then it levels off and you climb. And so you hit that flat part and you feel like you've got a chance to take a break, but you don't. That's where you need to be cresting the hill. You need to be working on your hand speed. You need to be keeping it up so that you hit the next piece of the climb with a little bit of momentum. It is not time to rest. It is 4 straight climbs where you do not get a break.
Okay, then it's right into the brownstones and down the famous last drive of Boylston and Goosebumps, and you finally got it done. So yeah, it is. It's a very challenging course. And Amanda, I don't want to get too off track, and I want to talk a little bit about the field. And I think this would be a good time for you and I to go out on a limb and go ahead and take our predictions as to who will win this race and why they might win it. So I'm going to let you go first.
What do we want to start with, the men's division or
Yeah,
the
let's
women?
start with the men.
So I think that for anybody who has been following the sport of wheelchair racing, especially for the past 5 or so years, they know that the story is Daniel Romanchuk and Marcel Hoog. Which one is it going to be? And something really interesting that we've started to see over the past year or so is the gap between Marcel and the pack was growing, 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 growing. And in Paris, that gap finally started to close. Daniel took the win in the 5K, winning the gold medal, outsprinting Marcel Hoog at the end, and that was a huge moment. And I think that it's kind of reinvigorated the field a little bit because now it feels attainable. However, that said, if this is sunny day with a tailwind with good conditions, Marcel Hoog is like a rocket downhill, and he is going to be almost impossible to catch. But Daniel's still my favorite for second.
Go along with that. I've got Hoog winning the race until further notice, and he proves otherwise. I think he's still the man to beat, and he's such a good, strong, technical racer, and I just like the way he doesn't get rattled. I mean, we did see him get beat at the last Paralympics, and it's no surprise. He said it. We all get old. It's going to happen. There will come a day, but this will not be the day. Marcel, who will win the race. I suspect Daniel will be second, and I'm going to go out on a limb and pull David Weir of Great Britain in for third.
I think David Weir is an interesting one because we haven't seen him race nearly as much over the past 5 or 6 years. He's been a lot more selective about the marathons that he goes to.
Right.
And I don't know. I might like David for third as well. I also think John Boy Smith is a surprise sometimes. He's a little bit inconsistent, but when he's training well and when he's racing well, he's really strong, especially on these up and down courses.
Okay, let's go ahead and set the women. You go.
I love the women. I love this women's division. The field just keeps getting stronger and stronger and deeper. There have been some new people who have come in over the past few years with Catherine de Bruyne, who raced as a sprinter for years and years in her career before making the jump into marathons and just blowing the field away. Eden Rainbow Cooper, who was a huge surprise last year with a win. And then some of my personal favorites and the ones who have been around for a while that I got the opportunity to race against, Switzerland's Manuela Schär, and then, of course, from the U.S., Tatiana McFadden and Susanna Scaroni. But I think Catherine de Bruyne has been on an absolute run. She is really, really hard to beat, and I don't know what her weakness is. I feel like for most athletes, they're great climbers, they're great coasters, they're great on the technical courses where they have to corner. Catherine seems to be able to do it all and to do it all really, really well. So I'm really liking Catherine, especially if conditions are good. Eden Rainbow Cooper, however, is my pick for second. She's been dealing with an injury since Boston of last year. I haven't seen her race. She had a really, really rough Paris Paralympics, but I think if she is back and she is healthy, she is an incredible coaster. I don't know if there is anyone who can stay with her down those hills in the first half of the race. And if she gets away, it is going to be a lot of work, especially for the lighter athletes like Susanna, who are going to have to make up all of that time in the climb. And actually, thinking back to Boston last year, Catherine wasn't there. Eden ran away with it from the start, but Susanna Scaroni was closing on her with the climbs on that backside. And I think if the race was another 3 or 4 miles longer, Susanna would have caught her. So those are my favorite for top 3. It's going to be Susanna Scaroni, Eden Rainbow Cooper, and Catherine de Bruyne. I'm just not positive on the order yet.
I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb, and I will say de Bruyne. I love what she did in Paris. She won everything from 4 to the marathon. I mean, 5 gold medals, just unbelievable. Manuela Schär, 4 times she's won on this course. I think experience goes a really long way. She's also the course record holder at 1:28:17, and I like Susanna for third. Susanna will always have the problem of her weight in that course getting downhill. So she's always going to be playing catch up no matter what from 2 miles on. But I think she'll play enough catch up to slide into that third position. I think it's going to be an outstanding race. I don't disagree. I mean, Eden, I think it could really surprise us, but I think I need to see a little bit more from her. I know she's been dealing with an injury. Let's see what happens, but I don't think she's going to come back as defending champ. So I'm going to say Hoog and de Bruyne will be wearing the wreath. So there we go.
With double.
Yeah. So anything else you want to share?
No, I think that's it. I'm super excited. I think it's going to be an exciting race. Marcel Hoog going for, I think, his 8th win this year.
Uh-huh.
And that will tie him with Jean Driscoll with
Correct.
the second most wins ever on the course. Only person to beat them is the famous Ernst van Dijk, who retired just a few years ago. But I'm really excited about this. I think we've got a lot of new up-and-coming talent, especially on the women's side. I think that it's going to be clearly Danielle and Marcel on the men's side, but the women's side, I would say there are 6 women there that have a legitimate and very strong shot at the podium, and that's something really exciting to see.
Amanda McGrory calls the race just a couple of Mondays away now. It's going to be a very exciting day. Thanks for joining us.
Of course.